Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful Saturday morning. I am Kimmy Ramnine, Research Services Librarian, and welcome to the DC History Center. We are thrilled to be hosting today's House History Orientation with our partners at the People's Archive at the DC Public Library. Please note that this program is being recorded for staff use. Today's program includes an opportunity not only to learn from us, but to learn from each other. If you want to share your experience with other attendees, please use the chat. And if you want to ask us specific questions, use the Q&A function. Both of these options are located at the bottom of your Zoom window. So here's how this morning is going to go. We'll introduce ourselves as guides to your understanding the many, many resources available to do house history. Then we will highlight the resources themselves, explaining each type, as well as what kind of questions they will help you answer. While we're sharing the resources, we'll be putting links to them in the chat. But if you don't get them right away, that's okay. Stick around till the end and we'll send them all out as one long list. Our goal today is to share with you digital resources that you can use to do house history from your home. Let us know in the chat what your familiarity with house history is. Have you already started? Are you new to house history? Have you attended a workshop before with us or with our partner organization, the DC Public Library?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Anne McDonough. I'm the Deputy Director here at the DC History Center, formerly known as the Historical Society of Washington, DC. The DC History Center is a nonprofit, community-supported educational and research organization founded in 1894. We collect, interpret, and share the local history of our nation's capital. Our mission? We deepen understanding of our city's past to connect, empower, and inspire. We're located in the historic Carnegie Library at Mount Vernon Square, and we'd love to have you visit our galleries, join us for additional programs, or explore the resources of the Kiplinger Research Library. You can find us online at dchistory.org. With us today, we also have Julie Burns from the People's Archive at the DC Public Library. Julie?
Hi, how's everybody doing this morning? My name is Julie Burns, and I will be presenting on the digital house history resources available through the People's Archive at DC Public Library. So what is the People's Archive? You may have previously known us as Special Collections or Washingtoniana. Like the DC History Center, we recently had a name change. So we're now officially the People's Archive, which includes the Washingtoniana and Black Studies collections, the DC Community Archives, as well as the Peabody Room at Georgetown Library. And the library felt that this name change better reflects our mission, which is to connect you to unique resources that illustrate the District of Columbia's local history and culture. We are a home of discovery where diverse stories, past and present, are preserved and amplified. And we thank the DC History Center for having us this morning. We're very excited.
Before going into some of the online resources that will be helpful for your research, I want to introduce you to our library. The Kiplinger Research Library is the DC History Center's non-circulating special collections repository of Washington, DC history. It's where you can access all of the collections that live at the DC History Center. Currently, we do have limited appointments available on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10 a.m. or 1 p.m. You can write to library@dchistory.org to schedule an appointment. Our appointments are reserved for those wanting to work with materials from our collections. So for quick questions, for example, you're trying to track down the square number of your property or trying to figure out who built it, you can write to us. Or you can do it yourself after attending this workshop. So let's jump into our resources. For our first resource, I want to introduce you to the incredible tool, the interactive GIS map HistryQuest DC. HistryQuest DC is a resource from the DC's Office of Planning and has evolved out of the Historical Building Permits database. This will help you find the square and lot number of your property, and this information will be very helpful to find other resources about the building you're interested in. It will also tell you when the property was built, the name of the original owner, architect, and builder. Now, this online map is a version that is still being developed. So currently it only has information about extant or currently existing buildings in available. There is a Microsoft Access database that has information about other buildings that aren't currently in existence. So please write to us if you're looking for information about one of those. Later on in this orientation, Julie will share with you how you can access the microfilm of the building permits that's available at the People's Archive. All right, now for an example. Next slide, please. Perfect. Here you will see what the search results look like. At the top left of the box that says History Quest DC, you'll see the search box, and this is where you'll put in the address you're interested in. The map will then zoom you over to the location, but it won't pop up any details. So you have to click on that little black dot you see on the map to pull up details for that specific property. The colors that you see on the map represent the time period that that building was built, and there are many different layers to the map that you can toggle on and off to see different data. So I'd really recommend playing around with it a little bit. All right, let's move on to our next resource. The Recorder of Deeds online database is the official repository of all land records in DC and provides online access to document images and indices from 1921 onward. This tool can tell you who owned the property over time and includes information about deeds, mortgages, agreements, bankruptcy records, and many more. In these records, you can also see whether there were any racially restricted covenants applied to that property. The well-known local mapping segregation project, for example, uses deeds available on the Recorder of Deeds to map restrictive covenants on properties all across DC. You do have to create an online account to access the database, and it can be quite tricky to navigate. I'll show you some of the steps on the next slide. So in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, you can see the ways you can search. Using the square and lot number that I mentioned earlier that you can find on History Quest DC, I'm searching land records for this specific property. On the left, you can see the different kinds of records that will show up for the property. When you click on one of the blue links, you can see this 1952 deed show up. So please note that these only go back to 1921, so you do have to reach out to the Recorder of Deeds for earlier records. All right, on to our next resource. City directories are a treasure trove of building and genealogical information. From this, you can find out where someone whose name you know lived during a certain year, or after 1914, you can find out who lived at a certain property by the address. You can also find the businesses that operated during that time period. Data for these were collected via a door-to-door canvas, usually at the end of the previous year. So if your home was built and occupied within a calendar year, the residents may not appear at that address until the following year. This does not tell you the owner of the property, just the folks who live there. This can lead you down into the very, very fun rabbit hole of genealogical research, and also has very enjoyable older advertisements throughout the directories. We do have a number of these physically available in the library, but there are quite a bit available online. On the next slide, there's information about Boyd City directories that have been made available for free via the Internet Archive, HathiTrust, and Google Books. This online books page provides a very helpful inventory of all of these, so you don't have to jump around to the different places. There are other ways to access these through different databases where you do have to have an account or access to an account, and Julie will share more about these later. To the right of the slide, you can see examples of how the information is presented. All right, next I'll pass it back to Anne to talk about helpful collections to DC History Center.
Thank you, Kimmy. So a question that we often get is, do you have a picture of my house or the business I'm interested in? And to help answer that question, let me just tell you a little bit about our online catalog, which you can find at dchistory.org. Our catalog includes several different types of records, and here I'm going to focus on our photo collections. There are collections where each and every image is cataloged and it has a thumbnail image attached. And these are just fantastic resources for house history. So for example, the image on the left is from the Cleveland Park, Georgetown, and General Architectural Slide Collection, or SP0125. We give each of our photograph collections an SP number that stands for special photograph. If you click on a specific record, it will open to a page with more information about the photograph as well as a larger image file. Then we have collections where each image is cataloged, but there are no thumbnail images attached, such as the search for St. John's Lutheran Church indicates in the center of this slide, where the DC History Center icon is visible in place of a thumbnail image. Now we scan on demand, so if a researcher requested one of these images and we scanned it, then we would do a catalog upload, and the next time we looked at the record, you would see a thumbnail image attached to that record instead of the DC History Center icon. Then we have collections where there are more than 1,000 images described with a single catalog record. And there's a PDF attachment that has an address by address listing, such as the 16th Street Photograph Collection, or SP180, which indeed has nearly every structure on 16th Street as documented between 2009 and 2019. Sometimes individual addresses are listed in the catalog record, and sometimes you need to see the image itself to see if your building of interest is included. So it's catch as catch can. But I'll say that the photographs are the only type of resource in our catalog where you can consistently use the advanced search fields for square and block number. So for example, if a search for 918 G Street Northwest yields nothing, don't give up. Try searching 900 and G and North NW. In addition, you can search sometimes using nearby landmarks, which can often reveal an image that includes your building of interest, even if it's not called out in the catalog record. So while you can do a lot of research from home, there are many collections for which you'll really need on-site access. So for today's orientation, which is focusing on what research you can do from home, we're going to highlight a few collections where you can see both the catalog record and the image from the comfort of your own home. This will include 2 citywide photo collections and a few neighborhood-specific ones. So the first survey collection that we're going to highlight is the John P. Weimer Photograph Collection, or SP0052. Now, John Weimer created his own way of exploring DC through photography. He divided the entire city into 57 areas. You can see the outlines on the map on the left. And he systematically photographed a few blocks in each area between 1948 and 1952. He hand drew a map showing the streets he photographed, wrote a brief description of the area, printed and captioned each image in a scrapbook, and he also gave us the hand-cut negatives when he donated the collection in 1977. Each of the nearly 4,000 images is cataloged in the online catalog and has a thumbnail image attached, created from the original black and white negative. Now, specific addresses are generally not identified in the Weimer collection catalog record, but you can search the catalog by block addresses. So for example, for 1613 Buchanan Street Northwest, one of the addresses that was provided by a registrant from today's program, you can enter in the online catalog Weimer and 1600 and Buchanan and NW into the simple search. Alternatively, if you know the square number, you can enter the 4-digit square number using the advanced search. Now that's one way to explore the Weimer catalog. Here is another. And this one's very fun. A few years, a graduate student created a website that aims to match each of the Weimer images to a contemporary image via Google Street View. So you can see the circa 1950 image superimposed on a much more contemporary view. Now, the student who created this actually became the former research services librarian at the DC History Center, Jessica Smith. While she's no longer with us, her project continues on, and it's available via weimersdc.com. Now, not all 4,000 of the collection images are yet mapped on the site. It is a work in progress, but Weimer's DC is a wonderful resource to explore, to see the 1940s, 1950s images in a more contemporary context. You can then request any Weimer images you'd like to have via our image request form, which is available at dchistory.org. So that's one survey collection that we have, which covers the entire city. Another one is the Emile A. Press Slide Collection, or SP0034. Emile Press was a little less systematic than Weimer, but he too covered much of the city between 1959 and 1979. His collection is all color slides, and all 4,000 of them have been cataloged in the online catalog, and each record includes a thumbnail image. Specific addresses are generally not identified in the press collection catalog record, but you can search the catalog by block addresses or by square. Now, like Weimar, even if the specific address you're seeking isn't documented, this collection is wonderful for understanding what a particular neighborhood looked like at a point in time. And it's been digitized in its entirety thanks to a grant that we received. So with these two survey collections highlighted, the Weimar and the press, now we're going to look at some of the neighborhood specific collections that we hold. So these three images on the screen reflect a few of the targeted neighborhood architectural photo collections that have individual catalog records and/or contact sheets available online. Not all have thumbnails attached, but the descriptions are generally enough to determine if your building of interest is included. I should mention that all of our collections are built through donations, and they very often reflect the interests of the donors and/or creators. So for example, Kathleen Sinclair Wood documented nearly every structure in Cleveland Park as a part of the historic district nomination process. That collection is SP0122. The Cleveland Park, Georgetown, and General Architecture Slide Collection, or SP125, was created by an unknown photographer. The collection was actually purchased at an auction and donated to us, and it provides house-by-house documentation of those neighborhoods. The JEX Southwest Redevelopment Collection, or SP0020, offers a look at buildings that no longer exist, as JEX was documenting the destruction wrought by urban renewal in that neighborhood. The Susan Myers Capitol Hill Residence Collection, or SP0068, comprises slides taken by Myers for an article called Capitol Hill 1870 to 1900, The People and Their Homes. This was actually published in the records of the Columbia Historical Society, our predecessor organization, in 1974. So these are just a few of the neighborhood-specific photograph collections that we hold. We do have many additional ones, and our collections continue to grow. Now, as the last photo highlight here, I want to mention three collections that came to us via the DC Historic Preservation Office, which has run numerous surveys of specific areas and/or topics, generally including extensive historical research as well as on-the-spot photo documentation. We have the records from the downtown, the Blagden Alley Naylor Court, and the Blacks in the Arts surveys, all of which include exterior images, the latter mostly of Shaw and U Street. For some of the collections, we've been given negatives and contact sheets. For others, the contact sheets are the extent of what we have visually, but everything that we do have has been scanned in high resolution. These collections are all arranged by square and lot. In our catalog, search DC HPO and all of the catalog records will come up. Now, as I've mentioned, we have many additional collections that we're not highlighting today, both photograph collections as well as manuscript collections. But the ones that we have mentioned are both the citywide surveys and the specific neighborhood collections are at the ready for your online research. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Julie Burns from the DC Public Library's People's Archive to cover some of the online resources specific to them.
That's great. Thanks so much, Anne. So as I said earlier, I'm Julie, and I'll be talking about the resources available through the People's Archive. If you have a reference question or you'd like to make an appointment, you can reach out to us at peoples.archive@dc.gov or call 202-727-1213. And you can see our location and the hours here on this slide. Okay, let's get started. So the first resource we're going to discuss is maps and real estate atlases. There are lots of great plat maps available online through our digital portal, DigDC, as well as through the Library of Congress. These maps show the footprint of individual buildings at the time that they were published. And there's a lot that you can learn from them, including the square and lot numbers, which, as you've probably caught on, can be important for navigating other resources. And another reason why the maps are especially helpful for that is that these numbers can sometimes change over time. You can also learn approximate building dates if you're unable to locate this information elsewhere. The building material that was used, the lot dimensions, as well as just general neighborhood development. So here we've listed some of the most helpful maps and real estate atlases for house history research that you can find online. But I will say that both the DC History Center and the People's Archive have many more in person as well. So the first maps we have listed here are the Botchkey maps, and these are the oldest maps that include the footprint of the buildings, and those are available through the Library of Congress. These maps can be incredibly helpful, especially if the building that you're researching was built before the building permits started to be archived, or if you want to know what the area looked like before your home was built. Next, we have the Hopkins atlases, which are available through DigDC, which is our online portal. And as we get into the atlases, they'll have multiple volumes. And so I just want to mention that on the first page, there is a key, like the one that you see on the slide here, that will help you navigate which volume covers your part of the city. And then on that first page, it will also have an index map to help you navigate which page to go to find your house. The next atlases are the base atlases, so 1903 to 1921, as well as the Sanborn atlases, 1888 through 1916. Those are all available through the Library of Congress. And lastly, I've listed the DC Atlas Plus, which a coworker of mine often refers to as sort of a modern day version of these maps. And it has lots of different filters that you can play around with. It can be helpful in certain situations. There are many more regional and neighborhood maps available through DigDC and the Library of Congress, and I encourage you to explore those and have some fun with it. And as I said, we do have more in person as well. So I know that's a lot, but we can take a look at a quick example on the next slide. Okay, so this is one, an address that someone sent in, 1325 Quincy Street Northwest, which according to History Quest was built in 1916. So we've placed a close-up of that part of the city from a base atlas in 1913, side by side with one from 1919. And you can kind of see that the land is still being broken up, streets are being planned, and then especially of note, how many houses were built from one time period to the next. And it's a little bit difficult to see as the picture is a little small, but with a closer view, you can see those square and lot numbers, the lot dimensions, and all of that I mentioned earlier. Okay, we'll move on to our next resource, which is the Building Permits Index. Kimmy gave a great overview earlier of History Quest DC, which includes information about a home's permit to build, the original permit, but there may be other permits associated with a property, such as permits to renovate or build a garage, etc. And so the way that you locate those is through the index. And they're organized a couple different ways, depending on the time period. So by square number, subdivision, if applicable, and street address, which means that you may need to look in a couple of different locations to find all of the permits associated with a property. And one other thing I will note about the index as well is that it covers through 1958, but the collection itself only goes through 1949. And I'll tell you where to find more recent permits in just a moment. So the actual permits from 1877 to 1884 are also available digitally as part of this collection that's on DigDC, and the rest is on microfilm in our reading room. And then permits issued after 1949 are housed at the DC Archives. So I believe I have a quick example of what this could look like on the next slide. Yes. Okay, so this is 942 T Street Northwest. And on the left, I know it's maybe difficult to see with the handwriting, but there is the original permit listed there from 1890. And then on the right, it appears that they built a shed in 1918, and you can see the permit number listed there on the far right-hand side. So with that information, then you could go to the microfilm and find the permit itself. Okay, great. So now I'm going to give a brief overview of some of the additional resources available through DC Public Library's Go Digital portal. Kimmy talked about both the Recorder of Deeds and the city directories earlier. And as you kind of go along and develop a list of names associated with your property, you may be wondering, what else can I find out about these residents? So through Heritage Quest and Ancestry, you can access more city directories, US Census records, military records, and so on. And if we move on to the next slide, I'll give you just a brief example of the type of information you can find through these databases. Okay, so here we're looking at 408 Crittenden Street Northwest. On the left, beside 408, you can see the name Reed Jesse, so Jesse Reed. And I found that using the street listing at the back. And then on the right-hand side, this is from the front portion of the directory. You can see that beside Jesse O, it's listed that his partner's name was Ruth, and he was an engineer for the Department of Agriculture. And then let's see, if we move to the next slide, here we go. So I did a search. Now that we have the name, I did a search for Jesse Reed, and this is what comes up. On the left, we have the listing from the 1930s census. So that gives you even more information about him. I know it's small, but I'll tell you just a few things. He was 32 in 1930. He was born in Pennsylvania, and he had 2 children. And down at the bottom, those actually link out to the other individual people. I found a military registration card from World War II as well using the databases. So if you wanted to, you could, keep going and do the same for other family members or for other residents. And that kind of helps paint a more complete picture of these individuals' lives. Oh, I'm so glad. Okay, so the last resource I want to highlight is also from DC Public Library's Go Digital. We have a number of local newspaper databases, but especially of note are the Evening Star and the Washington Post. So how are newspapers helpful for house history research? They can help fill in more gaps about former residents. For example, were they ever featured in a news article? Did the paper run their obituary or maybe their marriage announcement? You could also learn more about the property. Perhaps there were advertisements from when it was first built. Maybe there was an event that happened there or nearby. And so in my final example, I'll give you just a taste of this on the next page. Here we go. We're looking at 401 Rhode Island Avenue Northeast, which is, I looked up, it looks like it's a residence over a storefront. So the first block of text here is an advertisement from when it was first built, and that kind of gives you a description of the property. The second block of text is looking to hire a waitress for a restaurant that was located at that address, and it gives the name of the restaurant there. And the third tall rectangular block of text says that someone named Joseph Alpert was issued a retail license for the address. So you can find stories, additional context, more search terms like the restaurant or more names that will help you as you continue on with your house history research. All right, and that's all that I have. I know it's a lot, so feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. And I will pass it back over to Kimmy.
Actually, I'm going to jump in for a moment here, if that's okay. We are getting lots of great questions about how the heck do I find all these links? How do I access these resources after the orientation is over? So what I'm going to do is, this is breaking news. We weren't going to do any live demos during this orientation, but we're going to see how this goes. I'm going to share my screen and bring up the website of the DC History Center, which is dchistory.org. And everything that we're covering today, you can access through our Building History Resources Guide. So the way you access that is you go to the Research tab, you scroll down to Research Guides, and then right up at the top, Building History here, click on that. Okay, so this is our newly refreshed Researching Building History Guide. And every resource that we're going over today in the orientation, all of the links are found here within this guide, okay? So I would actually love to hear in the chat, you know, we always wonder why people are interested in doing the building history, why they want to learn about the story behind a particular address. So if you want to put into the chat what brought you to this topic, we would love to hear it. You know, we work with folks who are researching sort of legal title to a property to sort of address a current issue they might be having with their neighbor. Or we get a lot of queries from folks who are looking into what life might have been like for their grandparents when they were living in DC. So we really love to hear the stories behind what brings people in to do research. So please do share that in the chat if you feel comfortable. But since you clearly are interested in building history, the way we've organized this guide is two ways. Resources by type. Okay, if you click on that, you will see the links for building permits research, maps and real estate atlases, city directories and tax directories, photograph collections, including the ones that we mentioned today, links for census materials, newspapers, deeds and land records. One thing that we didn't address in the presentation is that, in fact, we actually have a lot of published house history research. So before you start going through all of these steps to look up a particular address, you might want to see if somebody has already gone before you and done the research for you. So for example, we have several manuscript collections that will have intensive research on particular addresses throughout the city, including those done by professional historians, as well as those becoming professional historians, students enrolled in historic preservation classes over at GW. We also have more than 100 published house histories that were done by a local firm. Each one of these is arranged by the specific address that is researched. So again, you know, doing the original research yourself is really the fun of the game, but it is nice to see what has gone, the research people have done before you as well. So that's how you access it by type. We also know that sometimes you don't necessarily know which resource you need to answer the question that you have. Okay, so we tried to also reorganize these resources in this fashion. So if your question is who lived there or who owned it, as Julie and Kimmy have explored in the presentation, you're going to be looking at resources like city directories. City directories, again, will tell you who lived in a house. They don't necessarily tell you who owned the house. house, right? So for that, you would want to go to resources like the property tax assessment directories. If you're looking to just find very basically the square and lot number, of course, History Quest is a great resource there. If you're looking to see what the building looked like or what the neighborhood looked like, that's where photograph collections really come in handy. If you're wondering who built it, who designed it, History Quest, the Building Permits Database, those are great resources for that. When it comes to a question that we're getting more and more often, was there a racial covenant on the property? There are several resources for that where you can do the original research, but we also have some additional resources available that will help you in that research. Last January, we held a program with historian Sarah Schoenfeld and social impact designer April DeSimone, exploring the impact on DC as a whole that was wrought by racial covenants. So you can get sort of the social history behind this before going into other sort of pathways for researching this. The Mapping Segregation in DC website is also listed through here. But that is just sort of a quick look at all of the different resources that we have gathered for you in terms of building history. I do want to point out a few little tips and tricks. If you're trying to figure out which side of the street an address would have been on, and you're trying to correspond it to maps and to photographs, this little chart can help. We also have some tips for locating pre-Civil War DC addresses, because of course addresses and street names didn't always stay continuous through time. And then we've also added a few downloadable note-taking resources. One of the things that we've found with folks who are doing house history research is you're not going to go to one repository, you're not going to go to one resource to get all the information you need. So keeping track of where you find the information can really be helpful in building a house history or building history through time. So just to help you along the way, we have 3 downloadable note-taking resources here that are organized by the type of resource. So hopefully that will give you a bit of a sense of where you can find all the resources that we're talking about today. This is a guide that is going to be continually updated. And so if you come across a resource in your research that we haven't referenced, we would love to hear about it. You can send us both queries and suggestions for resources to library@dchistory.org. And so with that, I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay, great. And I would, okay, it's great seeing all of these things coming in through the chat. I love it. I love it. We have family historians, including someone who is a 5th generation Washingtonian. We have folks who are looking into the history of houses in LeDroit Park. Oh, this is just fantastic. We're going to save these at the end too, because I love just seeing what's catching people's interest in doing this sort of research. Wonderful. We've got somebody who's writing a book about their family in Georgetown. Her great-grandfather was an African-American man who owned commercial property in 3 houses in 1920. Francis Scott Key lived in one of those houses, trying to verify some of the information that she has learned through time. Great, and this is wonderful. Okay, so I think at this point, we are going to take a look at some of the questions that we have in the queue. And let's see. Okay. Oh, this is important. We got one question of how can you become members of the library? Well, first of all, we would love each and every one of you to become a member of the DC History Center. If you go to dchistory.org, there is a link right at the top of how you can support the programs and access to the collections of the DC History Center through membership. Access to our resources, though, is welcome to everybody, whether or not you are a member. But it is that membership support that does help to keep access to the collections open. So thank you for that question. We really appreciate it. Let's see. Okay, I've got a question for that either Julie or Kimmy might want to field. Talking about how you can look at how a neighborhood changed over time, especially if that requires moving across atlases. So we're talking about the real estate atlases here. Julie or Kimmy, would one of you want to dip in with how you might use real estate atlases to trace the evolution of a neighborhood through time? I have the real estate atlases, the physical ones right back here, and we would love to have each and every one of you make an appointment to come in and use them. They are heavy, I have to say. Using the digital resources is a lighter lift.
Sure. Since I talked about the atlases, I'm happy to answer that question. And I hope that maybe the example that I gave kind of gives a glimpse into how it can help. I would say looking at atlases from before your home was built or the building of interest was built, and then afterwards as well, that kind of gives you a sense of, you know, what was going on around the building before and after it was built. And they do cover like surrounding areas as well. If you were interested in learning more about, you know, the neighborhood as opposed to like just specifically your house. So I don't know, I hope that answers the question. Do you or Kimmy have anything to add to that, or?
I'll just add that it does take a lot of opening these really big books side by side and looking at them across time. It can be really physically demanding work, but very satisfying.
Yeah, that is one nice thing about the ones that are online is you can kind of pull them up more side by side, you know, on the same screen, kind of like I did with that example, and see how it changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely downloading the files as you come across them, as you come across the address that you that you're looking into, downloading those files as opposed to continually going back to the database, I think is one way to do it. When you do download them, I would suggest making sure that you record in the file name, the volume number and the year and the plate. Those three details will really help you put the images in chronological order. And then if you printed them, you would be able to sort of trace the evolution of the neighborhood through time as well. We got a question about how street names change. And that's another thing that you can research through the real estate atlases. As street names changed, the old street name would remain in sort of the next one or two editions of the real estate atlas in parentheses. So the old street name would be in parentheses, the new street name would not have parentheses. And then after a while, I think once the publishers figured, okay, people are understanding this name, the street name has changed, they leave off the old name. So that's another kind of fun way to go through the real estate atlases. Okay, let's see. Okay, great. We have a question from Elizabeth about copyright issues relating to making copies of any of these resources, if you need to include it in a paper or report or any of that sort of thing. There are the real estate, I'll just jump in to answer that one about real estate atlases. The real estate atlases that are available online are the ones that are out of copyright. So you could download those files and use them to your heart's content. If you are doing a presentation, like a lecture or that sort of thing, you would request, if it's an image, you would request that through our normal image request procedure, and there isn't a use fee associated with that. That's sort of a public lecture sort of thing. If you had commercial use, that's a whole different ballgame, and that's really where you need to be much more cognizant of copyright issues. But for many of these, the underlining data is in the public domain. And so you would be able to reference with credit for a lot of these. Let's see. Okay, I've got a question about DCPL access. Susan's asking, with many public libraries, you can only access some of the digital resources with a library card, which you only can get if you live specifically within the city of that library. Is this true of DC Public Library as a way for non-locals to access the resources?
Yeah, actually, people who live in surrounding counties in Maryland and Virginia can still get a DC Public Library card. And you can apply for one online. It sort of sets it up as a temporary card. And then whenever you're able to come in to get the physical card, they'll just check a photo ID and something that has your current address on it. But like I said, surrounding counties in Maryland and Virginia are welcome to get a DC Public Library card.
Erie had a question about whether, Julie, if you found the census records for Jessio. I know that we used addresses that people submitted at registration as much as possible during our examples. Now, what we did, though, was do the initial research. We have not been able to actually do full house history research for all addresses that were submitted. So my guess is, Julie, that that was the extent of what you pulled up on Jessio, but is that?
Yeah, well, so I did 1930 because I did the city directory in 1930 because I knew I could also look at the census, but there were a number of other city directory entries and census records that I didn't look too much into. It looked like they maybe moved to a different address at some point, but beyond that, I didn't learn much about them yet. But that would be an example of now you have the name, you can go to the newspaper databases or continue on with genealogy research like Kimmy was saying.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. We have a question about how many resources are available for neighborhoods located east of the Anacostia River. That's a great question. Certainly in terms of the real estate atlases, that's volume 4 of the real estate atlases, and we have a full complement here. There are, of course, as Julie mentioned, there are more real estate atlases that you can access in person than are available online. Again, that gets back to the copyright issue. So all of the real estate atlases that have been digitized by either DCPL or the Library of Congress are the ones that are out of copyright. So if you made an appointment to come in either here or the DC Public Library, you would have full access to the real estate atlases, including those covering neighborhoods east of the Anacostia that are published after 1924. So that's certainly among them. Speaking for the photograph collections of the DC History Center, the Weimer collection covers east of the river. I believe the press does as well. In terms of the neighborhood specific collections that we have in the photograph collections, again, they're all built through donation. So we would love to have more representation of neighborhoods east of the river. If you know of anybody who has created a photo survey, either they or maybe their grandparents took extensive photographs of the neighborhood, please reach out to us at library@dchistory.org. We would love to add those sorts of resources to our holdings. With that, Julie, do you have any particular over at the DC Public Library that you'd like to highlight?
Well, just sort of looking back through my notes, I think all of the online resources that we covered today, you could research any part of the city with these. You mentioned the maps and the building permits and the databases. We do have more, resources that are available in person. Thinking about neighborhood history, one that comes to mind is our vertical files on different subjects, but we definitely have some for specific neighborhoods, and those are sort of collections of newspaper articles or pamphlets related to a certain topic. And we do have photo collections as well. I didn't get too much into it since they're not available online, but certainly feel free to reach out if you are interested in that.
Great. I just want to call out, I really love that participants are actually jumping in to answer some of these questions that are coming in. That's absolutely fabulous. One of the things that we love, I mean, all three of us are librarians. And one of the things that we all, I think, love about our profession is connecting people, connecting researchers with each other, connecting researchers to resources. And the idea that we've got somebody who's talking about a family home in Georgetown, and another participant has reached out to say that, to recommend looking at the archives at Tudor Place. And so, yes, please do share resources that you come across that have been helpful in your research, that may be helpful to those who are researching other buildings in DC. So we have, let's see. All right.
And I saw a couple of questions about the Peabody Room and
Ooh.
whether you can explain how that works as part of the People's Archive.
Sorry, I did see that earlier, and I did mean to jump in and say for Georgetown properties, certainly the materials at the Martin Luther King Library could still be helpful for you, but you would also likely want to check in at the Peabody Room, because my colleague Jerry, who is the librarian there, has files on so many houses that are in Georgetown. So that would be another great house history resource for Georgetown homes.
Another DC Public Library question. We have somebody who was using ProQuest, using some of the databases through ProQuest, and they wonder if they have to enter their library card each time they access.
Yeah, it depends. I think they're each set up differently. Some of them should connect right away if you're in DC, or some will connect right away if you're in the library. If it does ask for your library card, it may also ask for your PIN number, which would be the last 4 numbers of your library card, unless you've changed it to something else. I would hope it wouldn't make you, every time you're searching, log in again. I don't think it should be doing that, but yeah, it would depend on the resource, I believe.
Wonderful.
And there's also a question about researching architects and the different buildings that they've made. And I know that we have a great collection that you can access in person. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. We have some published printed material that are, biographical details about architects, prominent architects here in Washington, D.C. But we also have a collection that was created by James Good in the course of researching some of his books, focusing on the built environment here in Washington, D.C. And I'm going to go on, it's either MS 366 or MS 384, but if we search Good and architects in our online catalog, we would come up with the exact number for that manuscript collection. And this is one that is arranged by architect. So that is a great way to do a little bit more research on a particular architect. We also have the files that were created during the course of his research on capital losses, which is about prominent buildings, many of which are residences. And we have the full research collection for that as well. So if you're looking for, so the projects that are completed by a particular architect, that is one of the things that you can find through the building permits database. You can search by architect and see their projects through time. You can search by builder. So there are lots of different ways to slice and dice that sort of information. Great. Wonderful. So there are so many questions here that really make me want to say, everybody, please make an appointment to come on in to the DC History Center and or to go on over to the People's Archive over at MLK. But again, what we focused on today were resources that you can access outside of our buildings. So with that, I think I'm going to tip it on over to Kimmy, but I will say that we are going to take note of all of these questions, And we would, if we weren't able to answer them live, I really hope that you do do a little bit of research yourself and then reach out to both libraries for more help. That is why we're here. That's why we do what we do and why we have the collections that we have, so that people can use them to satisfy whatever sort of research need they might have. So with that, Kimmy?
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Julie. And I just want to say, please reach out to us for help, guidance on finding any of these materials. You don't have to make an appointment to come in. We do provide support via our quick reference services. So you can send us an email and get an answer back via email on how to approach something. I hope these resources that we've shared will help you in your journey into house and building history research. There's so much to learn, and we're excited to be along for the ride with you. I know I can speak for Julie as well and say we look forward to hearing from you via email. We will be resharing all of the links from today, and we invite you to copy and paste them from the chat. I know some folks have been having trouble copy and pasting them, so we will be sending out the LibGuide so that you can have access to all of the links. So so we'll drop a link to the LibGuide in the chat, but we'll send it out via email. Please join us for future programming, including for when we're once again able to hold our hands-on in-person house history workshops. If you don't already receive our newsletter, you can sign up to stay in the loop on all future programming. We invite you to respond to our survey, which also asks what library-based programming you'd be most interested to see offered at the DC History Center. Thank you again to Julie Burns for joining us from the People's Archive at the DC Public Library. And thank you to the DC History Center team present today, Anne McDonough and Maren Orchard, who's behind the scenes, as well as all of those working to support our programming. This educational program is brought to you by the DC History Center in partnership with the DC Public Library. We gratefully recognize support from Events DC and the DC Commission on Arts and Humanities. Enjoy the rest of this beautiful day. Thank you.